My husband left me right before childbirth to attend his sister's lavish wedding. I ruined her marriage and exposed her lies. I am 35 years old and have been married for 7 years. My husband's name is Andrew, and he is 39. We have a 5-year-old daughter, and I am currently 7 months pregnant. The main reason I'm writing this is that I just need to be heard. My husband has always been close to his family, and when we were dating, that didn't bother me. His family was always nice to me, but shortly after our wedding, I realized that he was extremely close to his mother and sister, almost like they had their own exclusive club. This didn't affect our marriage directly, so I just rolled my eyes whenever I saw them together. They weren't targeting me, so I didn't pay much attention. At any event or family gathering, they would sit together and criticize others. At first, they tried to include me in their gossip, but I am not a fan of idle chatter, so I kept my distance. They didn't make me uncomfortable, and I didn't bother them either. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were never particularly warm to me and kept their distance. I avoided them as much as I could. I absolutely disliked talking behind people's backs and then pretending to be friendly to their faces. When I became pregnant with my first child, I stopped visiting my mother-in-law. Firstly, I was looking for a reason to distance myself from them. Secondly, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were toxic. My husband was kind and caring, but God knows what happened to him when he was with his mother and sister. He turned into a completely different person. As long as he was civil and attentive to me at home, I didn't care what he did during the 2 to 3 hours he spent with them on weekends. I gave him that space. When our daughter Sarah turned 3, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law tried to turn her against me by saying, "Mom is bad," but Sarah fought back. She cried and said, "Mommy is good." Then she came home and told me everything. My husband laughed and said they were probably just teasing the child, but I knew their real intentions. From that moment on, I never let my daughter be alone with those nasty women. The situation worsened last year when my sister-in-law started dating a wealthy businessman from Scotland. It was understandable that she was overjoyed to have found such a man, but I was surprised by how excited my husband was about it. To give some context, my father-in-law has been retired for a long time and lives in a rural area. I have met him only a few times, and unlike the rest of the family, he doesn't tolerate nonsense. Perhaps that's why he moved away for peace. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law are unemployed and survive on rent from a family apartment and financial support from my father-in-law. My husband also gives his mother part of his salary. I have always been financially independent, so I didn't object to Andrew helping his mother. Back to the main point, since my sister-in-law started dating this wealthy man, her behavior changed completely, for the worse. She started acting like a princess. At family gatherings or any event, she constantly bragged about the expensive gifts her boyfriend gave her. She made sure to show everyone how rich she was. The funny thing is, my mother-in-law was also floating on cloud 9. She and my sister-in-law giggled together like teenagers. Their behavior irritated me, and my displeasure was obvious. It wasn't that I was jealous, far from it. The issue was that, since my mother-in-law and sister-in-law lived on a tight budget, they had never had anything to show off before. But now that my sister-in-law had a rich boyfriend, they started subtly humiliating me and accusing me of being envious. Of course, they didn't say it directly to my face, but their hints and gestures made it obvious. Some relatives even confirmed my suspicions. Soon after that, I became pregnant with our second child, and thank God it saved me from having to visit them. Andrew insisted that I let Sarah spend time with them alone, but Sarah refused on her own. She's only 5, but she already doesn't want to interact with them. I know some might accuse me of turning my daughter against my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but believe me, kids have better instincts than adults. They sense the difference between love and fakery. My first pregnancy was difficult. I was on bed rest. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law never visited me once. This second pregnancy has been easier, but now they visit often, not to check on me, but to show off their new jewelry, designer clothes, or $1,000 handbags. My sister-in-law was obsessed with how rich her boyfriend was and would go on and on about their plans for a grand wedding in Scotland. I would just nod with a forced smile and think, "Good for you." A week ago, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law suddenly showed up at my house. They started flattering me. My sister-in-law said she loved the apple pie and donuts I had baked years ago. Instead of feeling pleased, I became suspicious. I asked why they suddenly remembered desserts I had made long ago. They were clearly caught off guard by my directness. My sister-in-law said she had been craving apple pie but couldn't find one as good as mine in any restaurant. So, they wanted me to bake one for her. I thanked them and said I wasn't feeling well. Baking requires extra effort that I couldn't manage while pregnant and caring for a small child. They refused to take no for an answer and kept insisting. I couldn't keep refusing, so I told them I would try when I felt better. For the first time since our wedding, my sister-in-law hugged me and said she would come pick it up on Sunday. I didn't say anything or ask why it had to be Sunday. Honestly, I had no intention of baking anything. I had only said I would try to avoid conflict. By midweek, I was so exhausted from pregnancy and taking care of Sarah that I completely forgot about it. On Friday evening, Andrew casually mentioned over dinner that he would be busy over the weekend because his sister was hosting a dinner for her boyfriend and his family. I was shocked. Suddenly, everything clicked: the sudden compliments, the request for desserts, and why it had to be Sunday. Yes, I know I bake the best apple pie. I really am good at it. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to let someone else take credit for my work. More importantly, I wasn't even invited to this dinner. Andrew said that since I was 7 months pregnant, his mother thought I would be uncomfortable in front of guests. So they decided not to invite me. Even if I assume her intentions were genuine, which they weren't, why didn't they mention this when they came asking me to bake? Andrew just shrugged and said he didn't know. On Saturday, Andrew left to pick up his father and said he would be back on Sunday evening. I was furious, but chose peace over fighting. No matter what I did, it wouldn't stop him from attending. On Sunday, I turned off my phone and locked myself in my room with Sarah. I assumed my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had tried calling. When they couldn't reach me, they left voicemails on our landline. I ignored them all. I wasn't at peace, knowing they were probably cursing me for not helping them, but I was satisfied that I hadn't given in. The aftermath of the dessert incident on Monday morning, when I turned my phone back on, I found it flooded with missed calls and voice messages. It started with polite requests and ended with curses. As soon as they got a notification that I had read their messages, my mother-in-law called me immediately. Oh God, it was the longest monologue I had ever heard in my life. I always knew her true nature, but that day, I heard her real, venomous self. She accused me of ruining their dinner and called me a witch. Apparently, they were so sure I would bake the pie that they didn't prepare or order any other desserts. My sister-in-law had wanted to impress her future in-laws by passing off my pie as her own. In the end, the Scottish guests, who were huge sweet lovers, left the dinner disappointed. And guess who was to blame for their disappointment? Me, of course. As my mother-in-law hurled curses at me, I just pictured their embarrassed faces at the dinner table. I thought to myself, if this was such a disaster, why didn't they just order something from a restaurant? Yes, I knew my sister-in-law had bragged about her so-called baking skills, but a store-bought dessert would have at least saved them from complete humiliation. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I told my mother-in-law that I didn't care and hung up on her. Aside from all those messages from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, there was also one late message from Andrew. He simply wrote that he wouldn't be coming home that night and would return on Monday after work. When Andrew came back that evening, he was silent but didn't seem angry. I tried to tell him what his mother had said to me, but he cut me off, saying he didn't want to get involved. He claimed I was lucky that he wasn't mad at me for embarrassing his family the previous evening, and that I shouldn't expect him to take my side against his mother and sister. That's when I lost my patience. His mother and sister's words didn't really hurt me, because I already knew what kind of people they were. But what the hell was Andrew thinking? First of all, he should have supported me when I wasn't even invited to that family dinner. How the hell could I be blamed for ruining an event that I wasn't even allowed to attend? Since that day, we stopped talking. Neither of us made any effort to fix things. Even though my rational mind told me it was over between us, a part of me kept questioning myself. Did I really ruin their reputation by refusing to bake that pie? Update 1. 2 months later. Hello everyone. It's been 2 months since my last post. I am now 40 weeks pregnant, practically ready to give birth. After that incident, I realized I had been too patient with my husband. 2 weeks after everything happened, I had a scheduled ultrasound, and Andrew came with me. On the way back, I tried to talk about what had happened, but he told me to let it go and focus on my health. At the time, he was acting normal, and I took that as a good sign that he wasn't holding a grudge. But deep down, I felt like he was hiding something. And then, this morning, I woke up and saw Andrew packing his bags. When I opened my eyes, I noticed he was trying to squeeze his formal suit into his suitcase. I felt a wave of panic and almost screamed at him, asking why he was packing. He said he was going to Scotland for his sister's wedding. I was speechless. When? How did this happen? I bombarded him with questions. When was the wedding set? Why wasn't I informed? And most importantly, how could he leave me alone the day before my due date? Yes, my due date was tomorrow. He kept trying to avoid my questions or gave short answers. I told him he couldn't just walk out on me like that. I was angry, hurt, upset, and completely in shock. Just imagine your husband leaves you alone with a child the day before you give birth. I have no words to describe how I felt. I won't lie, I couldn't stay calm. I grabbed his shoulder and demanded an explanation. He said everything had been decided last minute and that he had to go. Apparently, the groom's family had insisted on this particular date, and there was nothing he could do about it. Of course, he could have done something, could have simply chosen not to go. As we were in the middle of our argument, the doorbell rang. Andrew ran to open it, as if he was expecting someone. It was his mother. She stormed into the house, yelling at Andrew for being late. She dragged his bags out of the room, saying he didn't need to pack anything else because whatever he forgot could be bought in Scotland. That statement felt like a slap in the face. In that moment, I wanted to punch her when she smirked at me. I realized it was too late to stop Andrew or even argue about it, so I went back to my room, threw the rest of his belongings into the living room, and locked the door. I heard my mother-in-law screaming at me, cursing me at the top of her lungs. Soon, they left. At that moment, I understood why Andrew had been acting so distant and secretive for the past month. I had thought he was just struggling between me and his family, but the reality was much worse. I was devastated both emotionally and physically. I broke down in tears. The chaos woke up my daughter, Sarah. She came to me, hugged me, and said, "Everything will be okay, Mommy. We should be happy because our baby will be here soon." Her innocent words melted my heart, and I held her tightly. We spent the day playing in bed. I tried to distract myself, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that Andrew had abandoned me in such a vulnerable state. I called my sister and asked her to stay with me the next day because I didn't know when labor would start. I needed to write this update today because what happened is suffocating me. Wish me an easy and peaceful delivery. Update 2. A few months later. Hello everyone. I know it's been a while since my last update. First, I want to share some good news. I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. On the night after my last post, I logged onto Facebook and saw that Andrew was happily posting pictures of himself and his family having fun in Scotland. I couldn't hold back. I broke down in tears. It was already past midnight, and Sarah was fast asleep. I went into the bathroom to cry in private. I had held myself together all day for Sarah's sake, but at that moment, I just let it all out. I sobbed for nearly an hour, and just as I was about to calm down, I realized my water had broken. I barely managed to crawl to the living room to call an ambulance. Everything after that was a blur. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital while being rushed into emergency care. When I finally regained full consciousness, I started calling for Sarah. A nurse told me they had found her crying next to me while I drifted in and out of consciousness. Since no one else was home, they took her with them. The poor thing had to sit up front with one of the paramedics. I was relieved that she was safe. Shortly after arriving at the hospital, I gave birth to my son. The nurses told me they had tried to contact my husband, but his number was unavailable. The next morning, my sister arrived. She lives 200 kilometers away, and when she found out what happened, she scolded me for not calling her sooner. I told her I thought I had more time. She was furious that Andrew had abandoned me and demanded that I divorce him immediately. Since I had been found in distress at home, the hospital reported the incident to the police. Officers visited me and asked if I had been subjected to any kind of abuse. They suspected I had been abandoned in a dangerous condition. I told them the truth. Andrew never physically abused me, but there was definitely emotional and mental neglect. His inaction had put 3 lives at risk: mine, Sarah's, and my newborn son's. Even now, It terrifies me to think about what could have happened if I hadn't managed to call an ambulance in time. I thank God that we all made it through safely. 2 days later, I was discharged. By then, my parents had arrived. They lived 4,000 kilometers away. They were furious at Andrew and wanted to take legal action against him and his family for the distress they had put me through. While I was still in the hospital, my parents packed up all my belongings from our home. I didn't want to stay with Andrew anymore. And honestly, who would want a husband like that? As soon as I was discharged, I moved to my hometown with my parents and sister. Andrew's reaction and my revenge. Almost a week after my son was born, Andrew returned home. From his Facebook activity, I could tell that after the wedding, they had extended their stay to explore Scotland. I was shocked by how casually he was enjoying his vacation while his wife was about to give birth. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't even bother to check if I was still alive. And I didn't contact him either because by then, I had already planned how to destroy his life. When he arrived home, he found an empty house, divorce papers, a police notice summoning him for questioning. He had 1 week to appear at the police station and explain himself. He panicked and called me over 100 times. I won't lie, I enjoyed every single one of his desperate voicemail. Then my mother-in-law started calling and leaving tearful messages, begging me to talk to her. My parents called Andrew and told him to come to our house if he wanted to speak to me. Andrew flew in that same day with his mother. My parents yelled at both of them for how they had treated me. They threatened to ruin their lives. Andrew begged for a private conversation with me. He literally fell to his knees, crying and begging for forgiveness. He tried to manipulate me emotionally, saying that our son needed a father and that I shouldn't take away his happiness. So I asked him, "What is our son's name?" He fell silent. My son was a week old, and his own father didn't even know he had been born. Do you think a child needs a father like that? Then his mother started begging me to drop the police charges because it would ruin their family's reputation in front of their new Scottish relatives. I just laughed. In the end, when they were asked to leave, they insisted on seeing the baby. I refused. I didn't want them near my children. My father threw them out, destroying my sister-in-law's marriage. Then, I did something petty. I contacted my sister-in-law's husband through social media. Since we had never met, I introduced myself. To my surprise, he already suspected something was off when I was excluded from the wedding. I told him everything. He was shocked when he realized Andrew had abandoned his pregnant wife just to party in Scotland. Then, he asked me about my sister-in-law. So, I told him everything about her true nature, including the apple pie incident, and how she tried to pass off my dessert as her own. He admitted that his wife and mother-in-law had lied to his family. Apparently, they told his rich Scottish family that they owned a chain of restaurants and that my sister-in-law was a professional chef. I exposed her as a liar who couldn't even boil an egg. That was enough. Soon after, I heard that her husband did a full investigation on my mother-in-law's family. The truth came out. They weren't wealthy. My sister-in-law had lied about everything. She had stolen money from his family's safe and sent it to her mother. Her husband called her a gold digger and filed for divorce. She was kicked out of her new home. I later heard that her Scottish in-laws were furious and cut her off completely. She sent me hateful messages, accusing me of ruining her life. I just sipped my wine and laughed. Final outcome: my freedom. My divorce was finalized last week. I got generous alimony due to Andrew's negligence, emotional abuse, and endangerment. I was granted part of the house because I helped pay for it. I gave Andrew 3 months to pay me my share or else I would force the sale of the house. I get child support payments. Now, I am happily raising my children with the support of my parents and sister. Andrew lost everything: his marriage, his kids, his money, his reputation. My sister-in-law lost even more. She is now alone, divorced, broke, and hated by her ex-husband's family. As for my mother-in-law, well, she will live in poverty with her 2 pathetic children. Cheers to their miserable future. In general, write your opinion about this story. You can also share yours in the comments. It will be interesting to read. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Your support is very important to me. Take care of yourself